The night is silent, but something feels wrong, an uneasiness that creeps under the skin before a single word is spoken. The screen opens with the glow of a lonely streetlight swaying in the wind, an empty road stretching into darkness, and the faint echo of footsteps that don't seem to match anyone we can see. A brief flash of police tape, a blurred image of a victim's shoes, a heavy breath caught on an old recorder. Then a voice steady calm, almost too calm, cuts through the tension and asks, "How well do you really know the people who live around you?" The camera lingers on a shadowy figure watching from a window, and as the frame tightens, the narrator continues, "He was the neighbor who always smiled, the man who held the door open for strangers, the quiet soul who walked home the same route every night." But behind that silence lived a darkness that no one, not friends, not family, not even the people who loved him, could have imagined. This is the story of a man who hid in plain sight for years. A predator who spoke softly, moved quietly, and took lives without ever leaving a trace. He was known to investigators only as one name, the Silent Reaper. As the unsettling atmosphere deepens, the intro begins to weave together the world surrounding this mysterious figure. Viewers see a montage of the small town where he lived, a peaceful neighborhood. Children on bicycles, a bakery opening at dawn contrasted with grainy crime scene photographs and interviews, with exhausted detectives who spent years chasing a ghost. The narrator explains that this case became one of the most puzzling and terrifying investigations ever recorded, not because of the brutality alone, but because of the man behind it. He was ordinary, forgettable, almost invisible, and yet capable of unimaginable cruelty. The intro explores the central question: what creates a person like this? Was he shaped by trauma, born with a fractured mind, or pushed over the edge by something no one noticed? As the music grows heavier, psychological experts, forensic analysts, and criminal profilers appear briefly, each hinting at layers of complexity that challenge everything we believe about human nature. The narrator closes the intro with a chilling invitation. Tonight, we go deeper than the crimes. We step inside the mind of the Silent Reaper and discover why sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who never make a sound. The town of Norfield was the kind of place where nothing extraordinary ever happened. People walked the same streets their grandparents once walked. Shop owners recognized every face, and children played until dusk without fear. It was a quiet town, maybe too quiet. For years, life flowed with comforting predictability, a routine that made everyone feel safe. But beneath that calm surface, something darker was taking shape, something no one was prepared to see. They say evil announces itself with chaos, with storms of violence, but in Norfield, it arrives silently. No warning signs, no trembling ground, just a subtle shift, the kind you only understand when it's too late to change anything. Before the first body was found, small things started happening, things people brushed aside. A pet disappearing, a stranger seen wandering at odd hours, lights flickering in an abandoned warehouse that should have been empty. No one made the connection, because why would they? Bad things happened in other places, not here. Odd. This was a town built on trust. Yet trust was exactly what allowed the Silent Reaper to thrive. He walked among them, unnoticed, unseen, a ghost in the crowd. Neighbors greeted him. Shopkeepers sold him bread. Parents let their children wave at him. He was part of the fabric of the town, woven so tightly into everyday life that no one ever thought to pull the threads and look beneath. When the first disappearance finally happened, Norfield didn't panic. People assumed it was a misunderstanding, a runaway, a domestic conflict. But as days turned into weeks and as more unsettling clues surfaced, the truth began to seep into the edges of everyone's mind. Something was wrong. Something was watching. Something was hunting, and had been for years. Long before Norfield knew the Silent Reaper, he was just a boy named Elias Crane. A quiet child with soft footsteps and a voice so gentle teachers often asked him to repeat himself. He wasn't bullied. He wasn't popular. He simply existed on the edges of everything. Children like Elias don't raise alarms. They fade into the background, unnoticed by peers and adults alike. Teachers described him as polite, calm, focused. But behind closed doors, his world was far from ordinary. His home wasn't violent, but it was empty emotionally, spiritually, and sometimes physically. His father left when he was 6. His mother worked long hours and slept through most weekends. Elias learned early that silence filled a room faster than conversation ever could. As he grew older, the silence became his comfort. While other children sought attention, Elias sought distance. He developed a fascination with the stillness of things. Abandoned buildings, quiet forests, empty streets at dawn. But it wasn't the beauty of those places that drew him. It was the isolation. He liked observing life from far away, untouched, unbothered, unchallenged. His earliest troubling behavior was subtle. He collected dead insects and arranged them with surgical precision. He watched neighborhood animals for hours, tracking their movements, predicting their routines. A school counselor once remarked that Elias seemed emotionally detached, but without any overt problems. No one looked closer. By adolescence, Elias had learned to mimic normalcy. He could smile. He could say the right words. But everything inside him felt disconnected, like he was performing a role he never auditioned for. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He simply felt nothing. That emotional void, that quiet emptiness, would soon become the perfect soil for something far more dangerous to grow. By adulthood, Elias had crafted a facade so convincing that even trained professionals would have struggled to see through it. He worked a modest job at a hardware shop, greeted customers with a gentle nod, and never once raised suspicion. He wasn't charismatic, but he was dependable, the kind of man people trusted without thinking twice. What no one knew was that Elias studied people with a precision that bordered on obsession. He watched how they walked, how they spoke, how often they left their homes. He memorized patterns without ever writing a single note. His mind was an archive of human behavior, quietly building a map of vulnerabilities. But the mask wasn't perfect. There were cracks, small ones. Moments when he stared too long. Times when his responses felt rehearsed. Instances where his eyes didn't match the expression on his face. Yet people brushed it off as shyness or introversion. After all, every town has someone a bit awkward. Elias didn't drink, didn't date, didn't socialize. And while that made him unusual, it also made him forgettable. No drama, no conflict. Just a quiet man living a quiet life. And that was exactly what made him dangerous. The Silent Reaper's greatest weapon wasn't strength, intelligence, or cruelty. It was invisibility. He built his entire identity around being unremarkable. A man who left no emotional imprint, no lasting memory, no trace. But under that calm surface, under the mask everyone accepted so easily, something dark was preparing to surface. Every serial killer has a beginning, a moment when thought becomes action, when fantasy crosses into reality. For Elias, that moment arrived not with rage, but with cold curiosity. His first victim wasn't planned in the traditional sense. There was no detailed blueprint, no chain of events pushing him toward violence. Instead, it was an opportunity, a chance encounter that intersected perfectly with the emptiness inside him. It was late autumn, the air sharp, and the streets nearly deserted. A woman stranded near the edge of town flagged him down, asking for help with his stalled car. Elias had seen her before, always rushing, always on the phone, always unaware of her surroundings. He offered assistance with a soft smile. She trusted him immediately. The attack was swift, almost mechanical. No words. No hesitation. No emotional rush. Elias later described the moment to investigators as quiet. Peaceful, necessary. While most killers recall their first act with trembling excitement or fear, Elias remembered only the silence. He didn't celebrate. He didn't panic. Instead, he studied the scene, memorizing his mistakes, analyzing what worked, what needed improvement. It was as if he viewed the moment through the eyes of a scientist, not a murderer. The body was never found. Authorities believe she left town voluntarily. Her disappearance didn't create fear. It created a story, a rumor, a puzzle that never felt like a threat. For Elias, that first kill awakened something, not pleasure, but clarity, a purpose. He realized that taking a life filled the emptiness in a way nothing else had. Not emotionally, but logically. He felt in control. He felt present. He felt alive for the first time in decades. And so, the Silent Reaper was born not in rage, but in silence. After the first kill, months passed without incident. Elias returned to his routines, maintaining the mask with careful precision. But inside, the emptiness had shifted. It no longer felt hollow, it felt hungry. He began observing people differently, not as individuals, but as potential subjects. Not as lives, but as opportunities. His next victims shared a common thread. They were people who wouldn't be missed immediately. A traveler passing through. A man estranged from his family. A local drifter known to disappear for weeks at a time. Elias didn't choose based on desire. He chose based on logic. The quieter the disappearance, the lower the risk. Over time, a chilling pattern began to take shape. Each victim vanished near the outskirts of town. Each disappearance occurred during periods when people were distracted, holidays, festivals, storms. And each victim carried faint similarities in age or vulnerability that only the most attentive investigator could notice. But the pattern was more than timing or location. Elias developed what criminologists later called his signature, a ritualistic behavior marking his work. He always ensured his victims were not found. He always removed personal belongings. And he always visited the site afterward, observing it the way a painter studies a finished canvas. Police chalked up the disappearances to individual circumstances, runaways, accidents, personal disputes. The idea of a serial killer never crossed their minds. Not here, not in Norfield. Meanwhile, Elias grew more confident. He refined his methods. He improved his disposal strategies. And perhaps most disturbing of all, he enjoyed the silence that followed each disappearance. The silence meant he hadn't been seen. The silence meant he was perfecting his craft. The patterns always catch up. And Elias' quiet masterpiece was beginning to leave faint, nearly invisible threads that would eventually tie him to his crimes. One of the defining characteristics of Elias Crane was his emotional void. Most killers feel something: anger, pleasure, dominance, thrill. But Elias felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no excitement. His expression during his crimes was the same expression he wore at the grocery store. Calm, thoughtful, almost detached. Psychologists later identified this as a particularly dangerous form of psychopathy. Elias didn't kill because he wanted to. He killed because it made sense to him. For him, the act of murder wasn't fueled by emotion. It was fueled by an internal logic he could never fully articulate. He saw people not as living, breathing souls, but as moving pieces in a world that felt overwhelmingly chaotic. When he removed someone from that world, he felt a sense of order restored. Not joy order. His routine as a hunter was chillingly methodical. For weeks, he would observe a chosen target, tracking their movements with the precision of a surveillance camera. He noted their schedules, their habits, their vulnerabilities. He memorized escape routes. He identified isolated areas with no traffic or cameras. When the moment came, Elias executed the act with cold efficiency. His heartbeat rarely increased. His breathing remained steady. If someone saw him nearby, he appeared calm, collected, unremarkable, a helpful stranger or a passerby. What made Elias especially terrifying was his adaptability. If something went wrong, he adjusted instantly. If someone unexpected appeared, he walked away without hesitation. He never operated impulsively. Every action was calculated. To him, the hunt wasn't a thrill. It was a solution to an internal disturbance he never understood. Killing quieted the noise inside him. Killing made the world feel still again. And that chilling lack of emotion was the reason he stayed hidden for so long. For years, the disappearances felt isolated, unrelated, a collection of individual tragedies. But when Norfield detectives finally examined a decade's worth of missing person reports, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. The victims had no connection to each other, yet their disappearances were eerily similar. Same general areas, same time windows, same lack of evidence. Detective Mara Linwood was the first to voice what everyone else was afraid to consider. This isn't coincidence. Someone is doing this. At first, her colleagues dismissed the idea. Norfield had never experienced a serial killer. But as Linwood dug deeper, she found unsettling common threads. No signs of struggle. No financial motives. No communication from victims. No remains. It was as though these people simply vanished into thin air. Linwood requested support from state investigators, and soon a task force was assembled. They began mapping disappearance sites, uncovering a quiet evolution of sophistication. Someone was learning, adjusting, perfecting. The task force cross-referenced weather patterns, community events, and traffic reports. Slowly, Elias's timeline began to take shape. Every disappearance occurred during moments when witnesses would be minimal. The hunter was patient, strategic, smart. Still, there was no suspect. No fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses. It felt impossible. How could someone commit so many crimes without leaving a trace? Linwood believed the answer was simple. He's someone we'd never look at. She interviewed families, neighbors, shopkeepers. Elias's name surfaced several times, not as a suspect, but as a helpful bystander. Someone who had been nearby, someone who had offered comfort. The task force labeled him the Silent Reaper long before they knew his real name. A killer who moved so quietly, so carefully, that he left nothing behind except unanswered questions. But the silence was beginning to break. Elias Crane had spent more than a decade killing without a single misstep. But even the most calculated predators eventually make mistakes. His downfall began with something simple timing. A heavy storm had flooded several roads, forcing Elias to alter his usual disposal route. Instead of his preferred secluded forest path, he chose an abandoned drainage tunnel he believed was equally hidden. What he didn't know was that a group of urban explorers had been documenting the site for a video project earlier that week. Their cameras, forgotten and waterlogged, were recovered by authorities investigating storm damage. One of those cameras held a brief, blurry recording. A figure in a raincoat dragging something heavy toward the tunnel. The footage was unclear, but distinct enough to suggest wrongdoing. Detective Linwood reviewed the video dozens of times. She enhanced the audio, stabilized the frame, analyzed the gait of the figure. She knew the image wasn't conclusive, but it was the first real clue they'd had. Meanwhile, Elias began to sense the tightening of the net. Patrol cars increased near his usual routes. The town buzzed with rumors. People locked their doors earlier, checked in on friends, avoided deserted areas. The silence that had once protected him began to feel suffocating. His next kill was rushed not in execution, but in planning. He chose a victim too close to home, too connected to the community. When she disappeared, her family caused a public uproar, demanding answers. Media outlets descended on Norfield. Pressure mounted on law enforcement. And forensic technicians made the breakthrough. A mud sample found on the victim's last known location matched the drainage tunnel. For the first time, Elias had left a thread behind. And Detective Linwood was ready to pull it. As the investigation intensified, Elias's carefully crafted mask began to crumble. Detectives started interviewing people living near the disappearance sites. Elias, always willing to help, responded with calm politeness. But this time, Linwood noticed something others had missed: the lack of genuine emotion. He asked the wrong questions. He responded too quickly. His eyes held no concern, no fear, no curiosity, just observation. Linwood reviewed old surveillance footage around victim locations. Elias appeared more frequently than coincidence allowed. A figure in the background, a passerby, a man walking alone at odd hours. These weren't incriminating images individually, but together they painted a troubling picture. A search warrant for Elias's home revealed nothing overtly suspicious. No weapons, no trophies, no journals. He had cleaned meticulously, using bleach in ways that suggested experience rather than hygiene. But Linwood's instincts sharpened. She believed he had hidden something, and she was right. In a small storage shed behind his home, beneath old tools and paint cans, investigators found a locked steel box. Inside, sealed in airtight bags, were personal items belonging to several missing victims: driver's licenses, earrings, scraps of fabric. They weren't trophies for satisfaction. They were reminders of his mistakes, lessons cataloged for improvement. When confronted with the evidence, Elias didn't protest. He didn't run. He simply looked at Linwood and asked, "How long have you known?" The interrogation that followed became infamous. Elias answered every question with unsettling composure. He admitted to the murders with the same tone someone would use to describe a routine task. No remorse, no justification, just clarity. Norfield finally saw the monster they had lived beside for years, not a rage-filled maniac, but a silent, calculated predator who walked among them with a calm smile. The Silent Reaper had finally been unmasked. After his arrest, Elias Crane underwent extensive psychological evaluation. Experts from across the country observed him, interviewed him, analyzed him. What they found was chilling. Elias wasn't driven by trauma or impulsive anger. He wasn't delusional. He wasn't mentally unstable in the way society imagines killers to be. He was, in clinical terms, a high-functioning psychopath with an emotional void so complete that empathy was impossible. Elias described his killings, not as acts of violence, but as corrections to the world. He believed his victims were chosen for logical reasons, though even he struggled to articulate the exact logic. When asked whether he felt guilt, he simply shook his head. "Why would I? They're gone. I'm here." That's reality. What disturbed experts wasn't his confession. It was his detachment. Elias displayed no pride, no regret, no fear. He spoke of death with the same tone he used to discuss grocery shopping. His emotional range was flat, his psychological profile dangerously rare. In prison, Elias remained quiet, cooperative, almost invisible. Other inmates avoided him, not because he was violent, but because he radiated something unnaturally calm. Something wrong. Guards reported that he rarely slept, spent hours sitting silently in his cell, and watched people with the same detached interest a scientist has toward an experiment. When a journalist asked him what he wanted people to remember about him, Elias replied, "Nothing. People remembering me would mean I mattered." And that was the truth. Elias didn't kill for fame, power, or pleasure. He killed because his existence felt hollow, and murder filled that emptiness for a moment. In the end, the Silent Reaper wasn't a monster from nightmares. He was a void wrapped in human skin. A chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous killers are the ones who look the most ordinary. The story of the Silent Reaper does not end with his arrest. In many ways, that is only where the questions begin. As investigators filed away evidence, as courtrooms filled with gasps and silent stares, Norfield was left with a truth far more unsettling than the crimes themselves. Evil does not always roar. Sometimes it barely whispers. For years, Elias Crane moved through their streets unnoticed, not because he was invisible, but because he looked exactly like the people everyone trusted. He reminded the world that monsters do not always hide in shadows. Sometimes they walk in daylight, offering assistance, holding doors, smiling politely. In the months following his conviction, Norfield struggled to rebuild its sense of safety. Families installed locks for the first time. Neighbors who once greeted each other with warmth now avoided eye contact. The illusion of peaceful small-town life had been shattered, replaced by a lingering understanding that danger can live beside you, eat at the same cafe, pass by your home every morning. The scars left behind were not just emotional, they were generational. Psychologists who studied Elias warned that he was not an anomaly. There are others like him, people who learn to blend seamlessly into society, who mimic humanity with chilling accuracy. But understanding Elias Crane offers something essential: awareness. Awareness that every community, no matter how quiet or welcoming, must remain vigilant. Awareness that behavior, not appearance, reveals truth. Awareness that silence itself can be a warning. As the final image of Elias fades into darkness, the narrator speaks one last time. The silent reaper thrived because the world didn't look closely enough. His story is not meant to frighten, it is meant to remind us. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. And remember, the most dangerous monsters are the ones who make no sound at all.